would not be an exaggeration to say that Pope Francis and the Grand Imam Ahmad al-Tayyib took the world by surprise on 4 February 2019 with their joint declaration signed here in Abu Dhabi at the Founders Memorial. It did not take time for the document on human fraternity for world peace and living together to be hailed as a milestone in interreligious dialogue, a landmark event. There were several reasons for this. It was the first time that a Christian and a Muslim religious leader of the prominence of Francis and Ahmad al-Tayyib signed a common declaration. Moreover, the declaration was signed during the first ever papal visit to the Arabian Peninsula. And finally, but not last, the Pope's journey to the United Arab Emirates took place on the 8th centenary of St. Francis of Assisi's visit to Sultan al-Malik al-Kamil, an encounter whose symbolic value perdures. Inspired by his namesake, Pope Francis said that he had come as a believer thirsting for peace, as a brother seeking peace with the brethren. In the interreligious meeting sponsored by the Muslim Council of Elders that preceded the signing of the document, with words that carried a strong sense of urgency, Pope Francis told the numerous religious leaders present that there is no alternative. We will either build the future together or there will be no future. At this historical crossroads, the religions were called, the Pope said, to contribute actively to demilitarizing the human heart by helping the human family deepen the capacity for reconciliation, find a vision of hope, and promote concrete paths of peace. Thus, it has been suggested that the document on human fraternity should be interpreted as an emergency declaration with the strong ethical purpose of fighting hostility and taking care of the world, which does not take anything away from its theological dimension. The main message of the Abu Dhabi Declaration is already contained in its title, namely that the way to achieve world peace and living together is by developing a sense of human fraternity that is truly universal, beyond national, civilizational, and religious boundaries. A sense of fraternity that embraces all human beings, unites them, and renders them equal, where the various cultural and religious experiences are allowed to coexist and build together a more just and peaceful society. Essentially, the document on human fraternity upholds a vision of fraternity in diversity. Faith communities are called to adopt a culture of dialogue, to cooperate, and to foster reciprocal understanding. And everyone, not just Muslims and Christians, everyone is invited to rediscover the values of peace, justice, goodness, beauty, human fraternity, and coexistence as the key to the survival of humanity. On 15th August 2019, the Higher Committee of Human Fraternity was established to achieve the objectives of the document. 4 days later, the building of the Abrahamic family house in Abu Dhabi on Saadiyat Island was announced as a concrete implementation and physical manifestation of the document on human fraternity. And finally, on 21st December 2020, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution proclaiming 4 February as the International Day of Human Fraternity. It is uplifting to see that the Abrahamic family house is now a beautiful reality. Its official website displays the following motto: diverse in our faiths, common in our humanity, together in peace, which seek to encapsulate the essential message of the document on human fraternity. As for the Higher Committee on Human Fraternity, its declared mission is to inspire all people to live the values of human fraternity. And among other initiatives, the Higher Committee has established the Zayed Award for Human Fraternity to recognize individuals, organizations, and other entities for their profound contributions to human fraternity. It seems clear, therefore, that there is a concerted effort to ensure that the document on human fraternity does not remain at the level of ideals and declaratory politics, but that it becomes a source of reflection and a reference for future social, economic, and political policies grounded on the recognition that we are all siblings, members of the one human family, and therefore responsible for each other and future generations. That the two signatories were not only addressing their co-religionists is evident in their call upon intellectuals, philosophers, religious figures, artists, media professionals, and men and women of culture in every part of the world to rediscover the values the document seeks to promote and to confirm their vital importance with the aim of finding a universal peace that all can enjoy in this life. A universal peace that all can enjoy in this life. So ends the document on human fraternity. Are these 10 words an impossible utopia or an achievable reality? In the latter case, does the document provide us with an accurate analysis of the current state of humanity and a realistic roadmap towards a better future? While acknowledging that it is difficult to assess fully something that is still unfolding, this Congress was convened with the aim to provide an academic forum for the discussion and evaluation of the reception of the document on human fraternity on the occasion of its 5th anniversary. As in previous meetings of the Pluriel International Congress, also this 4th meeting brings together the perspectives of scholars of multiple disciplines. It has been organized according to 3 main areas of analysis, in the conviction that a multidisciplinary framework enables us to explore the various dimensions and challenges involved in the promotion of human fraternity. These 3 broad areas of analysis are the socio-juridical, the geopolitical, and the theologico-dialogical. And I would like to offer now some thoughts and reflection on each of these 3 areas, by way of introduction to the presentations and discussions that will follow today and tomorrow, I am aware that each one of the issues I will raise is in itself a complex matter, and that my treatment will necessarily be incomplete. I offer my remarks in the spirit of intellectual humility, and I welcome in advance your reactions and comments today and tomorrow. The socio-juridical dimension. Perhaps one of the elements of the document on human fraternity that has received the greatest welcome is the endorsement of full citizenship as the only way forward in today's multicultural and multi-religious societies. The document rejects the discriminatory use of the term minorities, which is said to engender feelings of isolation and inferiority, and even pave the way for hostility and discord. Yet concern has also been raised that cultural and religious minorities do need legal recognition and protection to avoid becoming invisible under the mantle of a theoretical equality of rights and duties and the crushing weight of the majority. This is a valid concern that needs to be addressed. To be fair, the joint declaration signed by the Pope and the Grand Imam does not reject as such the term minorities, but only its discriminatory use. Should the document be understood nonetheless as calling to abandon a social model in which an individual's relation to the state is mediated through group belonging and in which minorities are the subject of a specific legislation, and to replace it with a social model based on the full citizenship of each individual? It is difficult to say, as the text does not sufficiently develop the question. But such a reading of the document would be congruent with a declaration issued 2 years before by Ahmad al-Tayyib at the end of a conference entitled Freedom, Citizenship, Diversity and Integration, which was jointly organized by Al-Azhar, Al-Sharif, and the Muslim Council of Elders on 28 February, 1st March 2017. The declaration connected the rise of demands for minority rights with the neglect of the concept of citizenship and its requirements, stating that the term minorities conveyed implications of discrimination and separation under the pretext of protecting minorities' rights. Sorry, you cannot see the sentence. The declaration further associated the term minorities with the colonial era and denounced its being now reused to promote division between Muslims and Christians and even between Muslims themselves. So what to think of this? Is the idea that minorities are entitled to specific rights no longer acceptable for the proper management of a nation's internal diversity? I would like to mention here a recent essay that Silvio Ferrari, a well-known specialist of law and religion, has devoted to the question. Ferrari reminds us that the notion that special rights should be reserved to religious and other minorities, this notion has always been challenged, not only on legal grounds, but also from the perspective of political science, sociology, anthropology, and even religious studies. We cannot review here these arguments in detail. Suffice it to say that some of them would seem to support the main thrust of the above-mentioned 2017 Al-Azhar Declaration, in the sense that granting special rights to religious minorities, according to some critical voices, risks slowing down or even preventing their integration into the society in which they live, encouraging the development of ghettos and separate societies. For Ferrari, these criticisms point to a number of unresolved issues, such as the tension between a strategy based on the universal right of freedom of religion and another based on the particular rights of religious minorities. The tension between individual rights and group rights, or the question whether rights should belong to individuals who are members of a minority or to the minority as a collective entity. In Ferrari's view, at the root of these tensions lies the more fundamental question of the relevance that should be attached to religion in defining the civil and political rights of citizens. Because of their particular experience, European secular states have considered religious affiliation or lack thereof to be irrelevant to the enjoyment of civil and political rights. By contrast, in some North African and Middle Eastern nations, religious affiliation continues to influence the civil and political rights of citizens with regard to family law, inheritance, and other legal areas. Given the increasing multicultural and multi-religious character of today's societies, Ferrari asks whether it is possible to find a point of convergence between these two approaches. I quote, "a conception of citizenship which does not exclude religion without making it a divisive element." Interestingly, according to Ferrari, in today's increasingly diverse societies, social cohesion requires a certain degree of legal pluralism, in which the state offers the individual citizens a set of different options to regulate the same legal relationship, for instance, marriage, in the way they consider most appropriate to their convictions. A key point in this model is that the person holding rights is the individual as such, not the individual as a member of a minority group. In other words, these rights are not granted to members of minorities, but to all citizens. It is not a system of minority rights, but a model of management of religious diversity available to any citizen who wants to use it. I am not in a position to evaluate the merits of Silvio Ferrari's proposal from a legal viewpoint, but I find it intriguing and thought-provoking. It also calls to mind Naila Tabara's supportive remarks about the current shift from talking about protecting minorities to protecting rights related to diversity as the way to promote social cohesion and avoid the risk of ghettoization of religious communities, confessionalism, and sectarianism. Tabara emphasizes, however, that social cohesion is not built by having in place an inclusive system of legal rights only, but by actively working on several levels to integrate the different groups of society into the national culture. A flourishing civil society is vital for generating hope, prosperity, and progress. We do have some legal experts among us, and I look forward to listening to what they have to say. Moreover, some papers in the Congress will contribute to grounding this debate around full citizenship and minority rights in an examination of concrete cases. What are today's examples of good and bad practices in regard to the treatment of religious minorities? Or are the approaches that focus on protecting minority rights inadequate because they maintain the status quo and exclude marginalized communities, as stated in the abstract of a paper that will be presented this afternoon? Focusing on the freedom of religion, rightly regarded as a litmus test for a society's respect for all human rights, focusing on the freedom of religion can further concretize this investigation on the tension between full citizenship and minority rights. One perspective commentator, who is among us, Emanuele Pisani, has observed that while defending several fundamental freedoms, neither the document of Human Fraternity nor the Charter of Mecca, which was endorsed on 28 May 2019 at a conference organized by the Muslim World League, so neither the document nor the Charter mentions the apparently more problematic freedom of conscience. And yet, as Pisani rightly notes, in the modern context, freedom of religion is intimately related to freedom of conscience, which includes the individual's choice to not believe. Many of us who identify ourselves as believers are convinced that human beings do have a moral obligation to seek the truth and to adhere to that truth once it is known to a sufficient degree. But we are not less convinced that adherence to the truth must be a free decision of each individual's conscience through a personal act of conviction. To impose a particular way of seeing the truth on others not only constitutes a violation of their conscience, but diminishes truth, particularly religious truth, which imposes itself by its own power. Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights recognizes that everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom, either alone or in community, with others, and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. So what to think, then, of the absence of the freedom of conscience from the document of Human Fraternity? Is it a dispensable element in the document's vision of fraternity in diversity? Is the lack of reference to conscience related to a general tendency in the document that appears to unite believers in God over against unbelief? The document on Human Fraternity denounces a political manipulation of religions and rejects interpretations made by religious groups who in the course of history have taken advantage of the power of religious sentiment in the hearts of men and women in order to make them act in a way that has nothing to do with the truth of religion. While this statement represents a theological conviction shared by the two signatories, the call for papers for the Congress invited contributions in disciplines such as peace studies and conflict transformation, human rights studies, international law, political science, security studies, and others, in order to understand better the role of religion and ideology in current conflicts. Are there positive examples of processes that seek to undo the effects of religious extremism and other forms of intolerance? How can governments and international organizations engage religious actors to promote common global ambitions such as sustainable development, human rights, and peace? Is religious sentiment powerful enough to mitigate global competition for political and economic hegemony and the control of natural resources by imbuing it with a sense of shared responsibility? I will simply offer now some general considerations on the prospects and possibilities for effective secular religious partnerships. Two panels this morning will take the discussion to a more practical level by discussing concrete examples. Recent reports have registered an increase in ethnic, religious, and sectarian discrimination associated with the rise of religious nationalism and civilizational rhetoric across the world. This phenomenon is precisely what the document on Human Fraternity seeks to counter by promoting a universal concept of fraternity that unites all human beings beyond cultural and religious differences. But it is not just the Pope and the Grand Imam who are convinced that religions can contribute positively to put humanity on a path to a better future. The global policy community, that is governments, international organizations, and think tanks, seems to be increasingly open to the idea that religion, which was considered until recently more often than not as part of the problem, religion can play a positive role not only in conflict resolution but also in advancing common human development goals. This new approach, which policy specialists refer to as religious engagement, this new approach has contributed in the post-Arab Spring context to a remarkable, if often unrecognized, level of religious political dynamism and institutional innovation. Earlier instrumentalist approaches to religion by states are now being replaced with a growing desire to collaborate with religious actors, particularly through interreligious dialogue initiatives, to achieve common goals. It should not be forgotten that many of the dialogical initiatives throughout the world remain apolitical and outside the control of the state. These initiatives are rooted in civil society, local in scope, and often religiously inspired. The global policy community is seeking ways to use the experience and the insights of faith-based, non-state actors for the formulation of new policy proposals. For example, it has been advanced that concepts such as human fraternity and inclusive citizenship, promoted by interfaith actors, these concepts are contributing to a rethinking of the role of religion and politics within a plural and multi-religious society, both nationally and globally, and producing substantive ideas about it. Like any novel proposal, religious engagement has its share of skeptics and detractors. And there are also those like Scott Appleby who warn that leaving behind a narrowly instrumentalist view in which religious actors are co-opted by states to advance foreign policy objectives requires a deep transformation at the epistemological level. It requires, among other things, not taking for granted the assumption that techno-scientific rationality is manifestly superior to other ways of knowing the world and ordering political and economic affairs, or that only a secular scientific worldview can be trusted to advance productive, progressive, peaceful relations among peoples and nations. Furthermore, Appleby recommends the global policy community, particularly in the West, to avoid seeing the religious world in binary terms, as comprising bad religious actors on the one hand and good religious actors on the other, according to their perceived resistance or accommodation to so-called liberal secular values. Ordinary religious believers across the world aspire to human flourishing with all its requirements, cultural and spiritual, as well as economic and material. Religious believers do not expect to be simply taught what is best for them by government and bureaucrats. Rather, they seek to be included in the larger public deliberation about achieving the common good. And accepting the legitimacy of this aspiration will increase the prospects of success of religious engagement by building more effective and inclusive secular religious partnerships, both at national and global levels. And this corresponds, according to Appleby, to the efforts of Pope Francis, Ahmad al-Tayyib, and others to set the fight against religious intolerance and violence in the context of a broader, comprehensive, religiously inflected and inspired agenda of constructive social change. As already mentioned, another concept promoted by interfaith actors that is attracting the growing attention of the global policy community in recent years is that of inclusive citizenship, as advocated by the Lebanese Adyan Foundation for Diversity, Solidarity, and Human Dignity. An example of this interest can be found in the Wilton Park Dialogues on Inclusive Citizenship, which were held between 2018 and 2021, engaging a wide-ranging array of organizations and individuals. While these meetings were initially convened to explore the concept of inclusive citizenship in the Arab world, the final report, which is easily available online, the final report is presented as a global document that hopes to serve to promote the idea of inclusive citizenship in the Middle East and globally. The report defines inclusive citizenship as an integrated system of policies, legislations, and behavior that embodies a comprehensive culture of participation. On the one hand, it aims to ensure the effective participation of citizens in public life, to guarantee that their voices are heard and that their special needs are met. On the other hand, it also seeks to integrate their cultural specificities into national life. The report goes on to say that inclusive citizenship protects societies from slipping into the formation of isolated groups because of their social, cultural, linguistic, or religious marginalization. And inclusive citizenship promotes fraternity and solidarity between people, allowing them to move from mere coexistence to a shared consciousness. 5 principles are said to be of particular importance for inclusive citizenship: human dignity, pluralism and inclusive national identity, comprehensive participation in public life, religious freedom and inviolability of the human conscience, the culture of dialogue and respect of difference. We have no time here for a detailed analysis of the implications of each of these 5 principles. I would like to underline, however, that the dialogue report acknowledges that, I quote, religious freedom begins with the recognition of the freedom and sanctity of conscience, with a reference in note to Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Adian has thus conceptualized inclusive citizenship as a framework for citizens to actively experience diversity, including religious diversity, not primarily as a source of division, but rather as enriching collective national culture and sense of belonging. Religious values and identities are seen as essential resources for social cohesion rather than as inevitable sources of conflict. While inclusive citizenship is not mentioned as such in the Abu Dhabi Declaration, it has been proposed that this model of citizenship best represents the political framework for human fraternity. Since recognizing the other in their cultural and religious specificity and contributions is essential to building fraternal and active solidarities. In other words, inclusive citizenship would correspond at a national level to the vision of fraternity in diversity advocated by Francis and Ahmad At-Tayyib in their joint declaration. It is my hope that this Congress will contribute to support, qualify, or dispute this claim. We move now to the theologico-dialogical dimension. Theology of religions is the term used in contemporary Christian theology to refer to theological reflection on the relationship between Christianity and other religions. Simply put, it is the effort to make sense, theologically speaking, of the fact that religions are many and different. Its most basic question is whether this religious diversity is merely a de facto plurality, consequence of the diversity of human cultures and worldviews, or a de jure plurality by God's will and design. In recent years, the term theology of religions has been adopted by Muslim and Jewish scholars to reflect on similar questions from within their respective faith traditions. The document on human fraternity describes itself as a, I quote, joint declaration of good and heartfelt aspirations, not as a systematic theological treatise. The document does not address itself to professional theologians. Its most basic theological affirmations are formulated in simple words, namely that the human family has an innate vocation to fraternity, that this fraternity is not built upon a forced uniformity, but embraces variety and differences between siblings, and that this arrangement corresponds to God's wisdom. The document explicitly states that the pluralism and diversity of religions, colors, sex, race, and language are willed by God in His wisdom. In other words, differences, including religious differences, are not accidental side effects of human history. Rather, they are included in God's wisdom. The document does not attempt to explain the matter further, but goes on to lay some practical requirements of its vision of fraternity in diversity. And yet, this apparently innocuous endorsement of diversity was almost immediately met with fierce criticism in the Catholic world by commentators who understood the document to uphold the view that religious diversity is positively willed, positively intended by God, and hence a departure from previous church teaching. While these initial criticisms were often voiced by non-critics of Pope Francis, the controversy nevertheless points to a key theological question, key for the long-term prospects of Christian-Muslim dialogue. How does the ideal of human fraternity promoted by the Abu Dhabi Declaration invite Christians and Muslims to rethink their theologies of religions and their understandings of mission? In a way, we should not be surprised that the interreligious practice and the desire of believers to go further in their mutual appreciation sometimes clash with established theological positions. Like in other areas, also in the area of interfaith relations, theology often follows practice, experience coming first and the reflection on it later. Jean-Paul Vesco suggests that the document on human fraternity should be read according to a hermeneutic of newness, rooted in the personal encounters of its two signatories, the friendship, and the realization that they share the joys, sorrows, and problems of our world, as well as a profound hope in a better future for all. It seems to me that the capacity of interreligious friendship to generate a deeper theological and spiritual understanding should not be underestimated. But even if theology follows practice, it is important that theology not be left too far behind. Religious leaders and scholars need to explicate a theological rationale in their tradition for their new practices. In the case at hand, for promoting a vision of universal fraternity in diversity that links the plurality of religions with God's wisdom. For centuries, Christianity and Islam have each aspired and have worked hard to bring all humanity into their respective folds. This missionary impetus was hardly in need of justification at a time when both traditions were strongly attached to exclusivist views about religious truth. The document on human fraternity challenges Christians and Muslims to rethink their classical conceptions of evangelization and da'wah, respectively. I say rethink because it would be a mistake, I believe, to interpret the document as espousing a relativistic vision of truth or as renouncing all missionary practice. It would be likewise mistaken to imagine that the document represents the first ever challenge to classical models of mission based on exclusivist views about religious truth, at least in the Christian tradition. For the first time, however, the challenge comes from a joint declaration by high-ranking Christian and Muslim religious leaders. And in this sense, it becomes a new stimulus for both Christians and Muslims to continue to reflect on their theologies of religions, their understandings of mission, and their approach to religious alterity. To reflect not in an isolated manner, each side on its own, but in tandem, as it were, in a context of interreligious friendship and shared aspirations. At this point, allow me, please, to raise a concern. In its official website, the Middle East Council of Churches welcomed the Abu Dhabi Declaration, I quote, as a new charter for humanity and a global constitution for nations and peoples that believe in heavenly religions and yearn for stability, coexistence, and peace. This statement caught my attention because it employs a characteristical Islamic expression, heavenly religions, Diyanat as-Samawiyya, which is not present, however, in the document on human fraternity. The term heavenly religions is often used in modern Muslim parlance to stress the commonality of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam by virtue of their common origin in revelation from God. The term also appears in discussions that extend beyond purely theological issues. For instance, in connection with discussions regarding citizenship and basic freedoms. The 2012 statement by Al-Azhar and Egyptian intellectuals on the system of fundamental freedoms, Al-Hurriyat al-Asasiyya, uses this notion, heavenly religions, and the parallel concept of divine religions, Al-Adyan al-Ilahiyya, to limit the freedom of belief by the need of preserving the sacredness of the three divine religions. As a Christian, I can respect the fact that Muslims have developed their own categories to frame their discourse on religions. Christians have done the same thing. But I think that Christians should not co-opt language that expresses a specific Islamic perspective, and vice versa. More fundamentally, my concern is about the role of theological ideas in the process of framing the juridical understanding of basic human freedoms. Should the legal exercise of the freedom of religion, both in its personal and communitarian dimensions, be framed according to one particular religious group's view of what constitutes acceptable religious belief? no matter how large, established, or influential the group may be in a particular society? Who determines what constitutes acceptable religious belief becomes crucial in situations where religious rights are granted only to state-recognized religious groups. Time is running fast, so I skip some elements and I move towards the conclusion. There is one final issue I wish to address, even if briefly. As you know, the notion itself of fraternity promoted in the document has also raised debate. Above and beyond the term's alleged gender bias, why fraternity? Above and beyond that, some Muslims and Christians retain a more fundamental hesitation to extend its religious connotation beyond the boundaries of their own confessions, as shall be discussed, I believe, in some of the presentations in the Congress. These hesitations are not per se an expression of intolerance or narrow-mindedness, as illustrated, for instance, in the guidelines on dialogue adopted by the World Council of Churches since 1977, which preferred the expression neighbors of other faiths in speaking about the followers of religions other than Christianity. Or we may also quote here the celebrated dictum of Ali ibn Abi Talib in his letter to the governor of Egypt, Malik ibn al-Harith al-Ashtar, reminding him that each of his subjects is either your brother in religion or one like you in creation, fil khalq. But is it fair to interpret the document of Human Fraternity as asking believers to use terms such as fraternity, brothers and sisters, and the like in relation to the followers of other religions in exactly the same way in which they would use them within their own tradition? More generally, does the document advocate a notion of universal fraternity that seeks to override or replace other understandings and experiences of fraternity? The fundamental theological conviction that underlines the entire document is already expressed in the very sentence of its introduction. Faith leads a believer to see in the other a brother or sister to be supported and loved. It is not therefore a sense of fraternity arising from a purely secular project like that of the French Revolution, but one that derives from faith in God, who has created all human beings equals in rights, duties, and dignity, and who has called them to live together as brothers and sisters, as the document proclaims. But it is clear, to my mind at least, that the Pope and the Grand Imam are not asking religious communities to renounce their own internal sense of family belonging that naturally develops among the followers of the same religious tradition. Rather, they are exhorting us to hold together this sense of religious belonging, often rooted in Scripture, and their sense of belonging to the human family. Likewise, by connecting fraternity with faith, I am convinced that the Pope and the Grand Imam do not wish to diminish or in any way supplant other secular and humanistic notions of human fraternity. On the contrary, their joint declaration is proposed to all and everyone in the conviction that it will resonate with their own aspirations to fraternity, an aspiration that is worth recalling here. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights has enshrined in its own very first article in terms of moral obligation. All human beings are born free and equal rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Nevertheless, by connecting fraternity with faith, the document on human fraternity intimates a conviction that will become explicit in the encyclical letter Fratelli Tutti, in a section significantly entitled The Ultimate Foundation. Jason Welle has attempted to identify the plus that a faith perspective brings to the notion of equality in the document of faith of human fraternity. He notes that while the document is consistent with modern concepts of human rights, grounded on the equal dignity of all, the document does contain a value added that is generally absent in the human rights tradition. This element is the warm affection for the other, which makes equality fraternal. Fraternal respect for the dignity of the other is not founded, according to the document, on a sterile and legalistic approach, despite the juridical ability of such an approach to guarantee rights. Fraternal respect emerges from the faith that stimulates affection and guides the believer to love. I conclude by taking up the question posed in the title of my presentation, the document on human fraternity, a roadmap towards a better future or an impossible utopia. Admittedly, the document paints a rather bleak picture of the contemporary world by speaking of a global context overshadowed by uncertainty, disillusionment, fear of the future, and controlled by short-sighted economic interests. But Pope Francis and the Grand Imam are not prisoners of disillusionment, nor are they lost in a quest for utopia. A main driving force of the document, not always acknowledged, is hope. Its two signatories tell us that the joint declaration was conceived from a profound hope in a bright future of all human beings. May this forum of discussion and debate be also, and above all, an expression of hope. I thank you for your kind attention, and I wish you an enriching Congress and an excellent stay in Abu Dhabi. And I apologize for overextending my time. Thank you.